They thought they were your foundation, your lifeline. They walked around with their heads high, thinking they were the reason you stood, that without them, you'd crumble, that without their approval, their presence, their validation, you were nothing. And you let them believe it, not because it was true, but because at one point you believed it too. They mistook your loyalty for dependency, your silence for weakness. You listened to their words, absorbed their doubts, and wore their opinions like shackles. They told you who you were, what you could be, and how far you could go, as if they had the blueprint to your destiny. And because you cared, because you trusted, you let them lead. But the greatest mistake people make? Assuming they're irreplaceable. They laughed, thinking you'd never stand without them. They made jokes at your expense, made comments that cut deeper than they realized. Every time they dismissed your feelings, every time they took you for granted, they convinced themselves that you were powerless without them. They believed they had you wrapped around their finger, that you'd always wait, always chase, always need them. But the funny thing about illusions, they shatter the moment you open your eyes. And one day, you did. One day, you saw through the smoke. You realized they weren't your foundation. They were your cage. And the second that truth hit, everything changed. They thought you were lost without them. They thought their absence would break you, that you'd come crawling back, begging for a place in their world. But instead, you stayed silent. You let them go. And that silence, it was the loudest thing they'd ever heard. Because while they were busy assuming they were your lifeline, you were busy discovering that you could breathe just fine on your own. You didn't just survive without them, you thrived. And now they're watching. Watching as you become everything they swore you couldn't. Watching as you rise without their help, their validation, their permission. The people who thought you needed them, turns out they needed you. They thought I was lost without them, but turns out I was just getting started. They never questioned their place in your life. Why would they? To them, your presence was a given. Your loyalty was expected. Your patience, your forgiveness, your time, it was theirs to take. They assumed they were a necessity, that no matter how they treated you, you'd always be there. You see, when people believe they are irreplaceable, they stop trying. They stop appreciating. They stop valuing what they have because they think it will never leave. They grew comfortable in your loyalty. They mistook your kindness for a weakness. You excused their coldness. You overlooked their neglect. You made space for them, even when they didn't deserve it. And the worst part? They thought you were oblivious to it all. They assumed you didn't notice how one-sided it had become, how they only reached out when they needed something, how they dismissed your feelings but expected you to carry theirs, how they walked away without hesitation but expected you to wait for their return. They thought you were blind, but you weren't. You saw everything. You just loved them enough to hope they'd change. But change never came. Because when you give too much, too freely, people stop seeing it as a gift. They see it as a guarantee. They never imagined a day would come when you'd stop trying. They took your presence for granted until one day it wasn't there anymore. And that's when the panic set in. Because the moment you stopped chasing, the moment you stopped calling, the moment you stopped caring, they started noticing. Noticing the silence, noticing the absence, noticing the void that used to be filled by you. Because suddenly, their calls went unanswered. Their jokes fell into emptiness. The comfort of knowing you were always one message away, gone. They thought you'd always be there, but life doesn't work that way. And now they feel the emptiness they assumed you'd always fill. People don't appreciate water until the well runs dry. There was a moment, a shift, a crack in the illusion. Maybe it was something small, a delayed reply, a half-hearted apology, an excuse that sounded too rehearsed. Or maybe it was something big, betrayal, abandonment, a final straw that broke the weight of your patience. And in that moment, the mask slipped, the illusion shattered, and you saw them, not as they pretended to be, but as they truly were. You saw them for what they really were, not pillars holding you up, but placeholders keeping you stagnant. They weren't helping you grow. They weren't building with you. They were simply there, occupying space, soaking up your light while giving nothing in return. And suddenly, it all made sense. The way you felt exhausted after dealing with them. The way your dreams felt smaller in their presence. The way your kindness was met with entitlement, not gratitude. They weren't supporting you. They were stunting you. They liked you needy because it made them feel important. They liked you doubting because it made them feel superior. They liked you chasing because it meant they never had to run. And for so long, you played along. You kept giving, kept hoping, kept shrinking yourself to fit into a space that was never meant to contain you. But then, you stopped. You stopped asking for their approval. You stopped over-explaining your worth. You stopped waiting for the bare minimum and started demanding the full course. Because the truth hit you like fire. You were never the one in need. They needed your energy. They needed your loyalty. They needed your love, your light, your presence. But you only thought you needed them because they made you doubt yourself. The second you pulled away, you didn't fall. You didn't crumble. You rose. You grew. You flourished. You started to breathe. And that's when it became painfully clear. They were never your foundation. They were just a weight you finally let go of. The moment I stopped begging for crumbs, I realized I was always meant for the feast. You didn't scream. You didn't beg. You didn't waste another breath trying to make them understand. You just left. No long explanations, no dramatic exit. Just silence. Sharp, deliberate, undeniable. And that's when the power shifted. See, they were counting on your attachment. They thought you'd fight for them, plead with them, prove to them why you were worth keeping. They thought they had you on a leash, a desperate soul who wouldn't dare walk away. But what they never realized was that the moment you stopped chasing, they lost control. At first, they laughed, shrugged it off, told themselves you'd be back, but days passed, then weeks, and then the silence started to sting. Silence isn't emptiness. It's a roar they can't escape, a mirror they can't avoid, a punishment they never saw coming. When you stopped reacting, they lost their ability to manipulate you. When you stopped reaching out, they felt the emptiness of their own presence. When you moved on without them, they had no choice but to face the truth. They weren't as important as they thought, and that burned them. Because they expected your breakdown, but instead, they had to watch your breakthrough. They expected your tears, but all they got was your absence. They expected to feel wanted, but now they were the ones wondering what went wrong. And nothing haunts a person more than realizing they overestimated their importance in someone's life. They underestimated you, thought you needed their validation, thought you needed their presence to survive. But instead, you thrived. You built, you grew, you stepped into your own power, a power they never wanted you to realize you had. Because some people don't want you strong. Some people don't want you independent. Some people only value you when you're beneath them. And the second you stopped being that version of you, they felt it. Some people only realize your worth when they no longer have access to it. They thought you'd crumble, thought you'd spend your nights drowning in regret, thought you'd come crawling back, desperate for the life you left behind. But instead, you thrived. While they stayed in the same cycles, repeating the same mistakes, you evolved. While they wasted time talking about you, watching you, wondering about you, you were busy building. You sharpened your mind, strengthened your soul. Every setback became fuel. Every scar became armor. And every time they expected you to fail, you proved them wrong without saying a word. At first, they ignored your progress, dismissed it, told themselves it was just luck, just temporary. But then, the wins kept stacking up, the confidence, the discipline, the undeniable shift in your energy. You weren't the same person they left behind. You weren't chasing. You weren't waiting. You were rising. And that killed them. Because deep down, they wanted you to struggle. They wanted to feel needed, to believe that without them, you were nothing. They wanted to be the reason for your success, not the mistake that pushed you toward it. But reality hit hard. Every move you made, every goal you achieved, was a reminder that they were never the foundation of your greatness. They weren't your strength. They were the weight you had to drop to reach it. And now, they can't stand it. They can't stand seeing you walk into rooms with a presence they can't ignore. They can't stand hearing your name attached to success they never believed in. They can't stand watching you become everything they swore you never would. Because nothing hurts more than watching someone thrive without you. And you're just getting started. They thought losing them would break me. Instead, it made me untouchable. At first, they didn't care. They thought walking away was their choice, their power move. They laughed, shrugged, told themselves you'd come back, because in their mind, you needed them. But then, the silence got loud. The silence hit different. The absence felt heavier than expected. You weren't reaching out. You weren't breaking. You weren't just fine, you were flourishing, and that shattered their illusion, and that's when the panic set in. They started watching from a distance, checking your social media, asking mutual friends, pretending they weren't interested. But every update, every win, every glimpse of your new life, it burned them. Because the version of you they see now, that's the version they never thought could exist. Stronger, wiser, unshakable. No more begging. No more over-explaining. No more trying to prove your worth. And now, they want back in. The regret is eating them alive. They replay the past, wondering how they let someone like you slip away. They wish they could rewind time, undo their mistakes. But the doors, they're locked. Because now they see the truth. They were never the asset. You were. They thought you'd be lost without them. They thought you'd be struggling, stuck, waiting. But in reality, you outgrew them. You no longer fit into the small, limited world they tried to keep you in. You expanded. You became more. And them? They stayed the same. Now, they sit in the shadows, watching, aching, regretting. But it's too late. Because you're too far ahead. They reach for the past, but the door is locked. And you? You threw away the key. They thought they left me behind, but in reality, I outgrew them. It always happens like this. They thought they could replace you, thought they could move on, like you were just another chapter in their story. But now, they're the ones struggling to turn the page. At first, they were too busy celebrating, too caught up in their own illusion. But the victory was short-lived. Because the deeper they sank into their ego, the clearer it became. No one could replace you. The people they surrounded themselves with, not the same. The energy you gave, irreplaceable. The loyalty, the depth, the presence you brought into their life, gone. And that's when it starts. The accidental likes on your posts. The sudden, "How have you been?" messages. The small, calculated attempts to test the waters, to see if they still hold space in your world. But what they don't realize, it's not the same. It never will be. Because you've changed. You've evolved. The version of you they abandoned doesn't exist anymore. They crave your energy. They miss your presence. They need the value you once poured into them. And for the first time, they're the ones feeling empty. Now, they sit there, watching, wondering, do they still have a chance? Can they still be part of your world? But deep down, they already know the answer. Because the truth is crystal clear now. You were never the one who needed them. They just needed you to believe you did. I was never the one who needed them. They just needed me to believe I did. You didn't seek revenge. You didn't chase closure. You just disappeared into your grind, into your growth, into your greatness. And now, they can't stand it. They thought your silence meant defeat. Thought your absence meant you had nothing left. But what they didn't know, you were rebuilding. While they wasted time talking, you were working. While they searched for replacements, you were evolving. While they assumed they had won, you were crafting a version of yourself they'd never have access to again. And now they see it. Now they feel it. Now they regret it. But regret won't rewind time. Regret won't bring them back into your world. Because their punishment was never your anger. It was your absence. The empty space where your energy used to be. The realization that they bet against the wrong person. And what stings the most? The fact that you never looked back. You didn't need to prove them wrong. Your success did that for you. You didn't need to fight for their respect. Your transformation made it impossible to ignore. Now they watch from the sidelines. They watch as you move in ways they never imagined. They watch as doors open for you that they swore would stay shut. They watch as you become the person they never believed you could be. And all they can do is wish they had treated you differently. But it's too late. Because the story they tried to write for you, the one where you never made it without them, that story never belonged to them. They wrote me off, but they didn't know the story was just beginning.